Welcome to Good Day Street Talk. I'm Ty Hernandez. It started as a small group online and led to protesters gathered in Lower Manhattan's financial district. Now, more than a month later, Occupy Wall Street has evolved into a worldwide movement. Protesters say they represent the 99% that do not benefit from capitalism, but critics say their message is vague and misdirected. Fox 5's Dick Brennan has more.
They produce slick videos like this. Definitely not your father's 60s protest. This one brought to you by Twitter and Facebook. But don't expect this group to have all the answers, especially for reporters.
Everyone wants to know specifics. Do you have a specific goal? Do you have a specific politician? Is there a politician? Is there an idea? What is it?
I think it's disempowering to say this is our one specific goal, this is our one specific demand.
It would also be off the group's talking points. Look at the thousands of emails circulating on the web between organizers about giving specifics. Quote, the moment we endorse any politician or any piece of legislation, the media will latch on to that as our one demand. At that point, they will have no need to cover us specifically. Emails insist, quote, it's best not to answer the questions that press pose.
Fox is here, and you know what? There is a God in heaven.
Michael Moore showed up in Zuccotti Park in September in a seemingly random visit, or was it? One email read, quote, does Michael Moore know about this event? Can anyone get in touch with him? Moore, of course, never got the memo on talking points.
Has capitalism been good to you?
No, capitalism has hurt. Capitalism destroyed my town.
One email gleefully says, quote, I'll keep working with Patrick to blank with the mass media.
We are here!
And when all else fails, get nutty. One organizer suggests if you find yourself in an interview you don't like, use the Dada Ninja technique. A sample. Interviewer, quote, why are you here? Dada Ninja, quote, the gravitational forces of the moon have ruined the taste of my coffee. I came down here to put pressure on the worldwide calorie-free sugar lobby.
These guys are very, very sophisticated. This is not your average protest. From food to business expertise to media relations, they have it all handled.
Messaging expert Mike Paul says organizers should be careful what they wish for.
When you have such an organization where you have so much money that you're still keeping it in banks when you're attacking banks, you become much more like the enemy than an average protester.
Well, joining me now to talk about the impact of the Occupy Wall Street movement is Nicole Gelinas, who's a senior fellow of the Manhattan Institute, Jed Morey, publisher of Long Island Press and founder of JedMorey.com, Dr. Paul Levinson, who's a professor of communications and media studies at Fordham University, political analyst Basil Smikle, who's the founder of Basil Smikle Associates, and Tom Borelli, director of the Free Enterprise Project at the National Center for Public Policy Research. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Big crowd, kind of like the one at Wall Street on certain days. Let's talk about Dick Brennan's piece. The idea is not to get stuck on one message, so then you have a protest just for protest's sake. It may keep it going, but is there a real strategy here in the end? What will they accomplish?
Well, Dick Brennan seems to be annoyed that the mass media are somehow being given short shrift here, and they are, because the mass media have done a very poor job in reporting this, in reporting the economic hardships that people are going through. And so what Occupy Wall Street is really about is getting the message out in a very different way, through Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook.
But it does seem to make sense, based on what we found there, that because we're not getting a single message for them, and now we're discovering that's what they want, because it kind of keeps them going. But if that's the case, then there won't be any change at the end of the day. I mean, is this a protest just for protest's sake?
No, not at all. What I see is a group of really left-wing radicals that are really supporting wealth redistribution and even more regulation of the private sector. And any group is going to be defined by what they say, what they do, and what they look like. And in all three, they're coming out looking really bad. They have anti-Semitic comments, anti-American comments, anti-capitalism comments, and it's very detrimental. And behavior-wise, you know, there's people say they smell, and there's people who've been arrested. So I think they also have a big image problem going forward.
People have been arrested because the NYPD is out of control. They arrested the other day Naomi wolf who is basically walking down a street. She's an author, posing no public danger or threat, but the cops thought that wasn't appropriate. So even though we have a First Amendment in this country, even though we're supposed to be a free society, she's pulled away in handcuffs.
But I think, so to sort of go back on your point, I think that they do have a bit of a message, but it's mixed. What's interesting is that we can talk about how sophisticated they are using social media, using Facebook and Twitter and other means, email, internet. So we're in an age where we need to find a message, because that's just the age that we're in. So it's appropriate to ask, what are the concerns, what are sort of the top 5 points that you want us to take away from this march? And in the absence of that, I think it's hard for a lot of people to be able to latch on. And I actually also bring in the point about the march in Atlanta. And they had Congressman John Lewis. And when you talk about someone who's been involved in civil rights marches for forever, and part of the struggle forever, I mean, this is one of the iconic figures in American protests, American civil rights, and he was not allowed to speak. So I think
the speech was silenced.
and so that, I think, is what I think creates this sort of mixed bag of messages, which is what a lot of people in the general public and some in the media are trying to maneuver through.
But when you see people like Chris Hedges or Jeff Sharlet and these renowned authors that are down there, these are not people who smell, these are people who are extraordinarily well versed in the issues of the economy and capitalism. And what you're seeing by not having any specific message is you're seeing a group of people that are coming up with very organic messaging that's coming from the bottom, being distributed through the top, but by stopping short of saying, here's our list of demands, which they are actually beginning to progress to, they're encouraging what we're doing right here, is having a dialogue. And all of a sudden, the nation is having this, what I think is a pretty stunning dialogue about what's happening.
I think one point of confusion that they should clear up is, are they trying to end capitalism or are they trying to fix capitalism? If they're trying to fix capitalism, much of the public would support them. If they want to end capitalism, the public would not support them. And I realize, many people want many different things, but some agreement on that broad point would be useful to their cause. So many people would agree financial sector needs much, much better regulation, for example. That's not a socialist, anti-capitalist position. If that's one of their positions, they should be much clearer about that it's not to eat the rich, it's to make sure that large financial institutions are adhering to free market principles, as they're not right now.
Look, I just say about this alleged lack of clarity of message, the idea that you have to have one clear message, that's an old-fashioned, old media idea. What's the headline in the newspaper? What's the lead story on a news show? But this is the 21st century. People communicate in a very different way, in a way that frankly respects the complexity of life much more than the old media did. So grow up, right? There's more than one message. It's very complicated. The message concerns students who are being defrauded on their loans. The message concerns banks that are zealously going after people who default on their mortgages and throwing them out of their homes. The message concerns the brutality of the police.
And why aren't they then in Washington? Because that's the source of all these problems. I mean, it's the policies that companies follow. It's the policies that got us in this economic problem under both administrations. That's the question. Why are they on Wall Street when the game is being run by Washington, and especially the Obama administration that has failed to deliver on jobs?
Well, a question for Basil. I mean, we're still operated by an organized system of government. If you want change on any of those points, you actually have to go and try to push legislation to get change on any number of points. Are they hurting themselves by not clarifying what it is that they want so they can get it, or is it good to just see what happens in this kind of stew of anger?
Well, that's that's the interesting bridge that I think is natural for a lot of us, particularly in the business of politics, to consider. Does this have an impact electorally? If you go back a couple of months and look at the campaign for marriage equality, that was clear in the sense that there was a goal, and that there were specific members of the state Senate, state assembly that were being targeted. And I think we kind of come away from that experience saying, okay, this is the end result. These are the people we know we need to go after. That's not really what's happening here. They're talking about broader policy issues, and that's why I think there's this there's this concern about whether or not, are there people that we need to be going after? Is there something that we can actually get behind? Is there an end goal here? Those are some of the constructs that I think people are wrestling with, and you're right, I think it is a great conversation that we should be having right now, but it remains to be seen whether or not there are electoral ramifications to this march.
And do you believe at some point, is this just, trying to bring as many people there as possible and then evolve into having one specific message, or do you think, what is the end game?
Well, I think the end game is to change the political system, and certainly they will be in Washington, but I think part of the brilliance that underscores this movement is that they didn't go directly to Washington, and they recognized that the policies that were established by Washington have ripped apart the fundamentals of the economic system in terms of the regulatory environment. So what they're saying is, let's go to the funding source first. You cut off access to the capital, and then you can work on policy later. But we have to realize this is a month old, and we're talking about it, and the president mentioned it, and it was in the GOP debate. So to say that they haven't been successful in putting a message out, I think is incorrect.
I agree with that completely. I just want to say part of the protest is against representative democracy, because not only the president, but our senators and our representatives are doing nothing. Look at the pathetic spectacle we had this past summer. They're arguing about the debt ceiling to the very last minute.
Well, I tell you what, we're actually going to talk about politics, and we're going to make some comparisons to the Tea Party. Today, we're taking a look at the Occupy Wall Street protests, and after the Tea Party movement gained momentum nationwide, some are saying that Occupy Wall Street will do the same, but can you really compare the two grassroots movements? Joining me again is our panel of experts, and we were just talking about politics, so why don't you can pick up your point where we left off.
Well, I think this Occupy Wall Street, as well as the Tea Party, both represent a resurgence of direct democracy and a frustration with our elected officials because they're not addressing the problems. Now, obviously, they have two very different kinds of solutions. The Tea Party wants less government. I think most people in Occupy Wall Street want more government. But they stem from the same frustration with this going to the ballot box once every 2 years, once every 4 years, going through the same routine, and nothing changes. And people are still suffering, people are still out of work. And that's what both movements have in common.
All right, so what do they do to sort of gain the type of staying power that the Tea Party seems to be having?
Well, being on Wall Street instead of in Washington is actually very smart of them, because it would just be yet another protest in Washington, a dime a dozen down in the Capitol. They are saying Wall Street is really Washington North, because this industry has benefited so much from too big to fail, from government subsidy, from all kinds of government subsidy for student loans and mortgages and so forth. So I think that's effective. As for, do they have a goal of getting representatives elected who share their philosophy, as the Tea Party did? 35% of them said they did in a poll, but in order to do that, in order not to scare politicians, they're going to have a much more disciplined message. So that's a decision that they have to make. It'll be very hard to get a mainstream politician to say that he or she unequivocally supports them if they're afraid that then the protesters are going to go out and call for something that most people don't agree with.
All right, you called it a movement that's clearly to the left. Is this the leftist version of the Tea Party?
Well, we'll have to see. With their branding, I think they're going to have a lot of problems. But, the Tea Party is very clearly for limited government and constitutional government and representative government. And the election in 2010 showed a huge swing that way, historical election in the House of Representatives. I think it shows a model of what happens when you go to a rally, then you go back to work, and you get politically active. I think that has worked for the Tea Party movement, and it's yet to be seen with the others, the other group, Occupy Wall Street. But I think ultimately, therefore, redistribution of wealth. And I think that's where there's going to be a big political divide. Big government has got us into this problem. Big government has got us into crony capitalism. Goldman Sachs gave the most money to President Obama. So you really have to go back to, who's funding it is crony capitalism, not capitalism. And I think that's where they got the messaging wrong.
But interesting here, the demographic is pretty widespread down there. When you talk about redistribution of wealth that some may support, there are some middle and upper middle class folks over at Zuccotti Park as well. I mean, how do we kind of merge this crowd into one voice, really.
Well, and the reality is that everybody has lost something in this recession, which may end up being a double dip recession. Everybody has struggled, wherever you are on the income spectrum. Certainly people who are doing badly before are doing worse now. And what, go back to sort of the electoral politics pieces of this, what they really need to match any of the Tea Party victories is a victory. The reality is that the President of the United States gets money from Wall Street, so are the Republican candidates. They're getting money from Wall Street as well. So that's not going to go away anytime soon. What if they want to be more Tea Party-esque, what they need to be doing is focusing on those 1 or 2 races that they think that they have some leverage and claim that victory. And once they do that, they can actually start to gain a bit of momentum. But we are on a fairly limited cycle right now. We don't have much time because the presidential primaries are coming up. So if they want to have that kind of success, they've got to put it into gear pretty quickly.
And I don't think they can...
Occupy Wall Street respects the Constitution also, namely the First Amendment, which says people have a right to peaceably assemble and speak their minds.
They're doing that with the anti-Semitic comments,
too. So what, again, are the New York City police doing, pepper spraying these people? That's a blatant violation of the First Amendment.
There have been some instigations as well. They've been provoking.
Who cares?
That's the sole...
But he was disciplined, though. He was disciplined.
It doesn't matter. He should have been fired. And frankly, I think...
How come none of this happens in the Tea Party?
I think there were plenty of outrageous things happening in the Tea Party things.
Find me an arrest.
Mainly because they were happening in places outside of New York City, where the police are generally better controlled than in New York City.
Two rallies in New York City.
Did you see what happened down there? Did you see the pepper spraying?
I saw activists rushing Wall Street. I saw activists rushing buildings.
They've been there for a month, and surprisingly, I mean, they pretty much, there seems to be not a stalemate, but some kind of understanding between the NYPD for the most part when they're at the park. I mean, they do seem to have, an agreement that is adhered to by both sides.
One of the best things I've ever seen in my life was just a few days ago, Shamar Thomas, an ex-Marine, lecturing the NYPD, saying to them, you're supposed to protect Americans, not attack Americans. And I think the NYPD should take that to heart.
All right, well, listen, next we're going to look ahead to the 2012 election. Will Occupy Wall Street influence the presidential election? When Good Day Street Talk continues, stay tuned. Whether you agree with it or not, the Occupy Wall Street movement has certainly made people take notice. But what about the impact on next year's election? Joining me again is Nicole Gelinas, who's a senior fellow of the Manhattan Institute, Jed Morey, publisher of Long Island Press, Dr. Paul Levinson, who's a professor of communications and media studies at Fordham University, political analyst Basil Smikle, and Tom Borelli of the Free Enterprise Project at the National Center for Public Policy Research. Welcome again. Welcome back. Jed, let's start with you. This is Occupy Wall Street, not Occupy Washington. Is President Obama safe with this crowd?
No, and I don't think anybody's actually really safe with this crowd, and that's the interesting thing about it is that they are going to take demands to Wall Street, they are going to take demands to Washington, and they are going to be representative of the so-called 99%, which again I think is part of the fundamental brilliance of the movement, is that it represents the majority of the vast majority of Americans. But what they're doing is they've actually assembled their own General Assembly, which are going to be convening in Philadelphia next year, which they just released. And they're going to be appointing people to each congressional district, so there's going to be 870 people, to take their list of grievances with what's occurring in Washington and put pressure to bear on sitting congresspeople, which is interesting because they're saying there's time yet to fix what's wrong. But if you don't, in the absence of that, we'll be there as an organized party for 2014 in the midterms and 2016 after that. So I think they've learned a lot from the Tea Party. I think that's been a very important movement for them. I think the genesis of some of the ideas are very much the same. But the key difference here is you have to understand, as people try to paint them as a party that is trying to redistribute wealth, they're actually trying to create a more equitable access to wealth, and that's a very key difference.
Does everyone agree that this is essentially a group of people that skew to the left? Is that pretty much an established? Would everyone agree with that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes. And I think it will spell very serious challenges for Barack Obama and his re-election. As far as I can tell, the protests are against government and its inability to solve our problems. That pertains, of course, not only to Obama, but to George Bush, under whose presidency all of this started. So it's pretty much an equal opportunity dissing. And
well, then how does it impact an election? What do we really get at the end of the day?
There could be a third party.
Depends how it evolves.
It could pressure Obama to take a more progressive position.
Correct.
There are all kinds of
How can you get more progressive?
No, and I think what's interesting is that there are a lot of Republicans that are afraid of the Tea Party, and similarly, there'll be a lot of Democrats that are going to be afraid of this movement. And it has to be sustained. So whatever they're doing in Philadelphia, it's got to roll into the primaries in January and February, and it's got to go throughout the entire presidential cycle. And if that happens, and if they can actually maintain this momentum through the entire year, you will start to see some impact on messages, on platforms going into both parties' national conventions.
You know, at the same time, they are poked fun at a bit. You know, people talk about they don't smell so great down there after a month at Zuccotti Park. People are poking fun at, you know, they're eating organic chicken and brown rice. So, I mean, is there a problem with their being taken seriously on a true political platform?
Well, any activist groups will be taken seriously when they're in the streets. I think one of the things President Obama has to worry about is being too aligned with them, especially with wealth redistribution. Obama said he wanted it. 1%, that's wealth redistribution. And, you know, more seriously, the Nazi American Party and the Communist Party have endorsed the Occupy Wall Street. So Obama has to be very careful not to be affiliated with groups like that.
Well, are they at some point going to have to turn people away from the open tent? I mean, really, right now, they're kind of welcoming all. At some point, are they going to have to close ranks?
Well, that's a problem, again, with the unfocused message that groups that you don't want will come in and fill some of that vacuum. And I think also on the larger issue, they've learned from the Tea Party that the Tea Party may have gotten some Congress people elected, but if the Tea Party does want smaller government, which is very unclear, I mean, you talk about an unfocused message, many of the Tea Partiers, they don't want to cut Social Security, Medicare, and defense. So what else is there for a smaller government? So that's an issue too. But they may have gotten people elected to do what they are supposed to want, but that hasn't happened. Things just are going along the same in Washington. So does Occupy Wall Street want to get a couple Congress people in, but just have the same old system where you've got Wall Street cash going into Washington and allowing Wall Street to keep its government subsidies? That wouldn't be much of a victory, and I think they realize that, so they may take a different approach than the Tea Party did.
As far as Obama, the best thing he could do is go down to Occupy Wall Street, pick up a bullhorn and say to those people, I hear you. And by the way, it doesn't matter who endorses people. You know, I'm an author. Can I help it if some lunatic reads my book?
They should stand up and distance themselves.
The fact that some party endorsed them means
with
nothing.
The Tea Party group, we policed our own
In fact, the labor unions, who are certainly not the Communist Party or the Nazi Party, have sent down their people. Close to it. I see. You have a lot of respect, I guess, for the working people.
My father was opposed to work. I have a lot of respect for unions,
on your table and many other tables.
But not what they're doing now with the not with the tactics. SEIU.
We can see
you're wearing purple, I see.
This is a conversation that is really going to continue.
Purple.
All right. Well,
Surprise.
listen, I want to thank all of my guests, and to learn more about all of today's topics, log on to myfoxny.com and click on Public Affairs. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ty Hernandez. We're going to see you next time for more Street Talk.